Okay, welcome everybody to this DH Hangout. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Ian Gregory from the History Department here at Lancaster, where I'm a Professor of Digital Humanities. We have a talk today from Sally Bushell and Rachel Hutcheon talking about mapping Sherlock Holmes onto Victorian London in 2D and 3D interactive forms. They're going to be talking about a paper that comes out of an AHRC follow-on funded project, which created Minecraft, a large-scale Minecraft map of Victorian London, working in partnership with Minecraft designers Blockworks. The academic side of this had to develop processes to embed Sherlock Holmes's narratives into the build using various mapping tools and late 19th century maps. So in the first half of the talk, they'll be describing this process in detail and show the developing build at different stages, and they'll then go on to consider some of the research questions and issues that arose from making it. Just briefly to introduce the two speakers. Sally is a Professor of Romantic and Victorian Literature in the Department of English Lit and Creative Writing here at Lancaster. She works on literary spatiality and the mapping of text in a range of ways. She's also interested in digital and spatial projects on the mapping of literature. She was PI on the AHRC-funded chronotopic cartographies project and the follow-on project that led to this work on steampunk Sherlock Holmes in Minecraft. She's also co-creator of an educational project, Litcraft, that re-engages reluctant readers by reading by using Minecraft to map literary worlds. She's written a wide range of publications on the topic of literary place and space. Her most recent book is published by Cambridge in 2020 on reading and mapping, spatialising the text. Rebecca is a research fellow at the University of South Wales. Before this, she worked at Lancaster on the chronotopic cartographies project and also on the steampunk project that we're talking about today. Her work focuses on literature of the long 19th century, cultural geography, and in digital humanities as well. Her book, Writing Place, is the first monograph to consider the works of George Gissing in the light of the spatial turn, and her current work, which is a co-written book with Sally, titled New Approaches to Digital Literary Mapping, Chronotopic Cartographies, is out later this year and asks what it means to create digital maps of and for literature. Alongside these, she's also co-creator of a cultural walking app, Romantic Bristol, Writing the City, and co-director of Litcraft. So without further ado, I will pass over to the peer review, and I very much look forward to hearing this.
Great, thanks, Ian. So, Becca needs to get us back. Yeah, it's about to start. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, quite informally. I'm just going to talk through the slides, talk about the project. And I'll be focusing on the process. First slide, Becca. Becca's going to do the slides. Yeah, the process, because I mean, this is a bit of a test for us. We're just saying, so we're going to hopefully give this paper at the Royal Geographic Society later in the year. So, yeah, sort of a paper of two halves. I'll talk about the process, and then Becca's going to talk about the research that emerged from the impact project. So next slide, please, Becca. So as Ian said, it was a follow-on funded project for knowledge exchange with Blockworks, who are a very prestigious, actually, Minecraft design company. And we'd wanted to work with them for a little while because we got in touch through Litcraft and we kind of looked at different options. Blockworks have this amazing project called the Uncensored Library, which I draw to your attention here, Reporters Without Borders, which is fabulous, actually. It's like a library built in Minecraft in a virtual world, and it has books that are banned in all different countries around the globe, but it can put them into the virtual space, so you can read a banned book in this virtual library. It was kind of a brilliant idea, I think. So yeah, we'd want to work with Blockworks to make a build that we couldn't make by ourselves, and make a much larger scale build. And we came up with the idea of doing Victorian London Sherlock Holmes. Next slide, please, Becca. So the kind of inspiration for it was Charles Booth's Maps of London Poverty. And these are held at LSE in London. And there's a fantastic website, which might be on one of the slides. I can't remember. Anyway, LSE have a fantastic interactive version of this map. So I was actually using the map with students. I did like had a little session where we used it for Dickens' Night Walk, and I got them to map out the night walk, and they found it's a big loop. You don't realise that when you read the text, but when you map it out, you do, and so on. And as I was doing this, I was thinking, this is a really interesting map, because the colour coding means that you can tell what kind of wealth or poverty, that's what it's intended for, is in a key area. So it would work really well if it were the base map for a Minecraft build, because we could do different streets and different styles according to wealth or poverty. So that's kind of where I got the idea for. The blue dot is 221B Baker Street, by the way. So next slide, please, Becca. So the Booth map, this is like the total map, but it consists of 12 sheets linked together. And even crudely there, you can kind of see the colour spread. So to the left of the image around the parks, you have a lot of gold, very wealthy, and quite a lot of red everywhere. And then large areas of blue and black south of the river, and obviously in the East End. The grey areas, kind of grey half circle there on the river, which is the City of London, which they didn't map because nobody lived in the City of London. So Booth had this colour code from gold down to black, and obviously superficially it looks quite controversial in that he puts the darker colour is semi-criminal at the bottom, below poor and very poor. That's slightly doing him a disservice, because his purpose in making the map was to show, he wanted to make it clear that poverty created crime, so that crime was due to unemployment rather than sort of moral disillusion or whatever. So although we now look at that, I think seems really judgmental, say poor, very poor, semi-criminal. That was kind of part of the argument he's trying to make. Like if you don't have any money, you have to become criminal. So we took this map and we decided, okay, we're going to use it to map Holmes' Adventures, the first short story collection, onto the Booth map. And they're very close historically. So the Adventures, I think, are 1891, and the Booth map is 1898 to 99. Well, there's two versions, 1889 as well. So that's what we decided to do. On we go, Becca. So the process so Becca and I really had to do a lot of underlying work to feed into to feed onto Blockworks to help them inform the build. So the first thing is, okay, how many of those stories are actually going to be properly mappable or not? So we worked through all the stories and kind of looked at their spatial elements, I guess. And as you can see, these are pretty much the ones we used in the end. So they all had good spatial elements. Some of them, like the Case of Identity, it says good spatially, but armchair solved. So there's the backstory is great, but actually Holmes doesn't leave his sofa, so it's not much use to us in trying to make an interactive narrative. And what emerged very strongly was that all of the stories have like a backstory, which is the person coming to Holmes and saying, "Oh, Mr. Holmes, please will you help me? This is what's happened." And then there's the active story of the investigation. So there are two narratives that are linked together in detective fiction. And this is made very explicit in Holmes. And sometimes that backstory would be really problematic for us. So not in London, or set, a long way away or a long time in the past. Then we thought, okay, that's just not going to work. So basically, we identified the stories that we thought would work best within the build. And then we realized, okay, we need some sort of interim mapping tool for us to map the narratives out onto the Booth map. So we had a look at some options. So we looked at Layers of London, which is a really good site. I recommend people to have a look at it. There's lots of maps on there, and we liked it because you could you could present your work through the Layers of London site at the end, which would have been quite nice. But it was quite restricted in its use of routes, which we wanted. We needed to map, and it was also quite crude. And crucially for us, you couldn't work at the same time. You couldn't work on the same map at the same time, which we really needed to do. So we decided not to use that. Same issue for Digimap tool. The key decider for us was simultaneously working. We couldn't do that. And also it was behind a paywall, so that could be problematic down the line. So then we decided to use Memory Mapper. And I was familiar with this tool because Duncan Hay, who'd also worked on the Chronotopic Cartographies project, had created it, and I'd used it with him in a couple of student sessions, and liked it because quite light touch. It did allow us, so crucially for us, it allowed us to work at the same time in the same map, which we realized was our deciding factor. You can have all different maps within on the same base map. You can have all different. So here you can see Holmes, Booth, Stevenson, Dickens. We're playing around, and you can just select one of those, and it will just show you those routes. It allows you to map very, very specifically as well. So you can put a very accurate route, which we wanted to do. So here we've got Dodger and Oliver's route into London, and Fagan's Den on the map there. So yeah, so we use Memory Mapper. Next slide, please. And we mapped, in fact, we mapped all the adventures for another purpose, for research purpose in the end. We mapped all the adventures onto the core map of Central London by Booth. So these are those stories in different colours. And we also mapped Sign of Four, which is a longer book, GCSE book, because we have a separate build for that. And that's what you can see in yellow, which actually goes in quite different area from Adventures, in fact. Okay, next slide. So once we made that map in the kind of mediatory space, Memory Mapper, then this is Blockworks. I don't know how they generate this, but anyway, somehow they do. This is their kind of total map base build in Minecraft. So you can see, if you just flick back a minute, Becca, to the previous slide. So if you see the colors there, if you look at like red or purple and then go back, you can see that they're kind of mapping that onto their version as well. So the color codes are shown. So basically we're setting like, what are the total parameters of the map? And trying to keep it as tight as possible. In fact, it has been a massive problem because the Booth map is very deceptive. It looks a lot smaller. Areas look a lot smaller than they actually are when you map them out. So the scale of the map has actually been created quite a few issues for us and made the project run really slow, but never mind, that's the way it is. Okay, next slide. So this is just to show again, so for the story of the Red-Headed League, the way you have like two different spaces within the text. So you have the backstory, which Jebus Wilson is telling to Holmes of what's happened. And then you have Holmes and Watson going around London trying to work out the case. And this is, you always have this like dialectic within the text. Next slide. So to help us, so what we found quite soon was like, although the Booth map's great, it wasn't always at key points within the narrative. Once you had mapped out the narrative, like the backstory, we say, okay, there's a site here that something really significant happens. There's going to be a very detailed build for this point on the map, and the Booth didn't give us enough detail for that. So we then used this site, which is again a fantastic site if you don't know it. Old Maps Online, really, really amazing site. And you can just put a square on the map anywhere in London in this case, but it's all around the world, and it will bring up all the historic maps that it has, which are quite a lot of that space. And you can set at the top, you can see timeline attributes. You can set it, I only want to look at maps for 1880 to 1920 or whatever it is, and it will select those for you and layer them onto the space. So we decided to use this tool to identify the pockets where we have really accurate pockets that we needed within the build. So this is an example from the Red-Headed League again. So in the Red-Headed League, Holmes and Watson get out at Aldergate Station, which is just kind of the left of that crossroads. So we know exactly where they come out, and they go to a court nearby. So for this, we use the London sheet, which is this incredibly detailed maps of London. And again, absolutely 1896, very accurate to the time period. And so we kind of look around and go, right, well, where? It doesn't say exactly where it is in the narrative. It's a fictional narrative. But can we find a location? Okay, in this case, yeah, there is a court within easy walking distance of Aldergate Station. And so we'd put it in there and tell Blockworks, right, put it here. And in this case, in this story, Jabez Wilson is a pawnbroker whose servant is scamming him and getting him out of the house every day with a kind of brilliant false narrative, so that he can tunnel through into the City and Suburban Bank behind, because the servant is actually a criminal in disguise. So then we tell them, okay, we need those two buildings, they must be adjacent and so on, and they make it in the Minecraft build. Okay, next slide. So the London sheet was a really important series, and then also the second map series, which was really, really good, very, very detailed maps of London, were these Charles Goad insurance maps, which were made obviously for insurance purposes, but are given incredibly even more detailed accounts. So again, this is in another story, The Man with the Twisted Lip mentions Paul's Wharf off the Thames below London Bridge, and we could find that exact site and then link the narrative into that. Next slide. So we would do all this kind of contextual work around the narrative and try and ground it as accurately as we could, and then we drop everything onto a Miro board. This is kind of the total board, and around have all the different adventures color coded with all the information that they need, like all the text where things are mentioned and so on. So that's how we worked with Blockworks through the Miro, which worked really well actually. So we drop everything in, and then the final thing we had to do was to make the kind of storyboard then what is actually happening in the world. And to do this, we used a different tool, Canva, which again was really good, free tool on the internet to storyboard it. We'll just show you a quick example. Next slide. So very simple, just picture by picture of what's happening in game and characters and so on. So yeah, read all about it, escape geese and missing jewels, and all the information, start here, buy the paper, this is the information you'll get, and so on. And then using cabs to kind of get quickly from one place to another as well within the game world. So that's pretty much what we did. These are so I've got two stills of the build in Minecraft. Next slide, Becca. And then there's a little fly through just to give you a feel of it, just for a minute or so. No, sound's not working again. Don't worry about it. There is some music playing, but just imagine that in your head. Okay, so that's all from me, and I'm going to hand over to Becca, who's going to sort of talk about some of the research questions and issues that come out of it.
Great, thanks, Sally. Yeah, and sorry about the music. It didn't work.
We needed to re-turn it off when we shared the second time.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, not to worry too much, I suppose. Yeah. So as Sally said, I'm now going to pick up on some of the research questions that came out of the project, and I suppose what we've kind of noticed and remarked on whilst doing the project was It was a sort of, in a way, an inversion of the usual model, if you like, in that normally or often you start with your research project and then impact comes out of that. This is an impact focused project, but then we found that research questions came out of doing impact activities. So yeah, just to kind of flag that. So what I'm going to do in the second half of the paper is pick up on some of the central questions that came up while we were mapping Sherlock Holmes onto real world maps. And the first of those questions, I suppose, is to what extent does the fictional world need to be accurate? So does it matter if there's a site in a Sherlock Holmes story that seems as though it's a real place, if you like, but when you look for it on the map, it's not there? What does accuracy even mean when you're reading literature, when you're thinking about mapping literature? And this is a kind of a key question in the context of digital and spatial humanities, because attempts to map literature onto the real, as we were trying to do when we were mapping Holmes onto booze, that's been the focus of so many digital literary projects in the past. And these projects have come across a few questions, a few problems, such as how can you use geometric tools to map places that aren't directly named in the text? How do you deal with a text that jumps from one location to another, but it's not clear how you get from one place to another? Whether or not you should visualize routes that aren't mentioned, but aren't narrated. And then I suppose there's this fundamental question then about how you map a literary text that has no correspondence to real world geography. And these kinds of correspondence issues are often addressed under the category of fuzzy geography or uncertainty within a text. And quite often polygons are used to symbolize that a location is kind of somewhere within an area, but it's not exactly clear where in that area it is. So what I want to do is to look at a final story from The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes to help tease some of these ideas out. So The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, it's a Christmas tale. And in this tale, a stolen jewel has been hidden in a goose, accidentally discovered and brought to Holmes. And then the criminal who stole the jewel in the first place is on a literal wild goose chase to relocate it, and Holmes and Watson are after him. And the narrative describes Holmes and Watson's route on foot from Baker Street to a pub in Bloomsbury with a high level of spatial detail. Our footfalls rang out crisply and loudly as we swung through the Doctor's Quarter, Wimpole Street, Harley Street, and so through Wigmore Street into Oxford Street. In a quarter of an hour, we were in Bloomsbury at the Alpha Inn, which is a small public house at the corner of one of the streets, which runs down into Holborn. So once they get there at the pub landlord then redirects them to the stall in Covent Garden where he bought the geese in the first place. And then Holmes makes this kind of direct connection between tracing the goose's origins and the evidential chain of events that will solve the crime. He says, "Remember, Watson, that though we have so homely thing as a goose at one end of this chain, we have at the other a man who will certainly get 7 years penal servitude unless we can establish his innocence. It's possible that our inquiry may but confirm his guilt, but in any case, we have a line of investigation which has been missed by the police and which a single chance has placed in our hands. Let us follow it out to the bitter end." So here then, spatial reconstruction becomes part of Holmes's method. He predicts that the accuracy of their reconstructed route will inevitably bring about a successful outcome for solving the crime, which it does. So bearing those things in mind, let's have a look at the options that kind of current digital mapping tools offer for visualizing character movements. And to think about this, we use the categories that are outlined by Bushell and her co-authors in a paper that they published from the Literary Atlas of Europe project. And what they do is they discuss the challenge in relation to digital mapping of routes, and their solution for mapping non-specific places in literature is via 3 levels of certainty. So the 3 layers of certainty are direct. So these are points that are taken directly from the text. They're named in the text, they're real places or they're correspondent places, therefore they're mappable. The next sort of level of certainty down, if you like, is indirect. And these are sort of plausible. So the text doesn't say something specifically, but it will plausibly be such and such location. And then the final, least certain, if you like, is an implied location, in which point the researcher, the reader, has to interpret place from text. Now, while this is helpful in thinking about digital literary mapping, in any attempt to map a realist novel or a text like Sherlock Holmes that relies on spatial verisimilitude, it rapidly becomes clear that there are actually two different types of spatial uncertainty being conflated in the categories on the slide there. One concerns perceived accuracy in terms of correspondence to named locations on the Earth's surface. So we might think of that as kind of points on the map, if you like, places which relate to points on the map. The other concerns continuity between fictional and correspondent place. So we need to distinguish between, first of all, this is kind of points on the map, if you like, fixed places, and uncertainty then ranges from places of direct correspondence to well-known named places at fixed sites, such as Covent Garden Market, moving through to direct but not exact correspondence, so one of the streets that runs into Holborn. Then you have something which is direct but generic in specific, so an area like Kilburn. Then you have something that's named, but it's a fictional place, for example, the Hotel Cosmopolitan. And then finally, you have fictional places, but also indirect and not named. So Watson's practice is an example of this. Actually, Watson's practice is kind of slippery because it is cited in a kind of a generic area, but it also moves around quite a lot. It's kind of fictional and indirect in that sense. That's your kind of first type of spatial indeterminacy. Secondly, then, you have a varying level of uncertainty when it comes to moving between these places, and we can think of that as the lines on the map. And here the range is from movement described in detail from street to street via one clear route, so it's unambiguous. You know exactly which route characters take, you know exactly what roads they go down, through to movement that's described using very clear waypoints, but it's not necessarily clear exactly how they get from point to point, but the points are very close together. So they might go down one street or another street, but you still know pretty well which route they take. Then we move into movement with these waypoints, these place names, quite distant from each other, at which point there's lots of options that the route you can plot on a map. And then finally, the movement isn't described at all. So you don't know how characters got from point A to point B, but you know they must have travelled there because it says so in the text. At which point the line, the movement is implicit, and you can go whichever way you like, in a sense. So how then can we map the character's movement in the blue carbuncle? So responding in correspondence to these options I've just outlined. So the first option is mapping only the named sites in the text. And in a way, this is superficially the most accurate, but none of these points can be given real-world coordinates, not even 221B Baker Street, because the site didn't exist. It's made up by Sherlock Holmes and placed in a kind of unmade road at that point. And what this kind of point-based map does is it distorts the textual account, because what we can see from the textual account is that movement is very much emphasised. So the text says we swung through a doctor's quarters through Wigmore Street. So the text is very much emphasising a route, movement there, whereas the points don't give a sense of that at all. So the next option then is to select the most logical route in terms of directness, but there's no way of confirming this in the text. So at this point, you're second guessing. Plus, what Conan Doyle does is he intermingles very accurate corresponding places with non-specificity in the text in this kind of almost willfully resistant way. So that a degree of optionality remains when mapping the text. So the Alpha Inn in the Blue Carbuncle is described as a small public house at the corner of one of the streets which runs down into Holborn. So you know kind of vaguely where it is, but there's options there, and you have to choose one, or you have to choose many, but the text doesn't point you to one specifically. And the same is true of the slum area, which is easily locatable on the booth map. I don't know whether you can make it out just there. It will be on, it's on the right hand side, almost towards the sort of end, bottom end, if you like. It's marked dark blue and black on the booth map, and it's above Covent Garden, but it's described in the text in a way that resists absolute mapping. So the text says, we passed down Holborn, we've passed across Holborn down Endell Street, so far very mappable, and so through a zigzag of slums to Covent Garden Market. So it kind of slips off the map there, if you like. So then it would seem as though the third and fourth maps, the third and fourth images here, provide the best solutions to that problem, because the route that Holmes and Watson take in the story must be contained within either the third map or the fourth map here, but there's no way of determining it. So it could be argued that what's really at stake here is multiplicity or optionality rather than indeterminacy. So the text is quite specific, but what the problem is not that the text is being indeterminate, but rather that it's giving you options on how to map. So there are multiple ways of getting from point A to point B, and the text doesn't specify which one. So in this case, an accurate map of the text would be to represent all the possible options, and that you can see that on the third map there. But this doesn't really correspond with the importance that the text gives to that reconstructing of a single route. So the only way that Holmes and Watson are going to catch the criminal is by retracing the criminal steps point by point. So in map 3, offering all the possible routes isn't going to allow Holmes to spatially solve the crime. Then the fourth image there uses polygons, and this kind of effectively communicates that sense of uncertainty. But again, you lose the sense of that very specific route that's taken through a pattern of streets, which again, as we said, the text strongly emphasizes. So these options, this mapping of all the different types of routes or zones of likely routes, it seems kind of quite tidy, if you like, on these maps here, in the sense that there's not a huge amount of space that's being covered. You can kind of take in the locations just by looking at those. But when you get to the backstory, and here the backstory is the story of the criminal, it becomes quite problematic because it's covering such a large area. And the backstory extends or ranges from a very specific point, 117 Brixton Road, which is where the criminal's sister lives, to a highly generic area of Kilburn, right up there in the north. So you're moving over a great amount of geographical area, and you're also moving between very specifically named mappable sites and quite generic sites as well. So what emerges then is that realism, or texts that use the kind of aesthetics of realism, is only mappable when we falsify it by treating literary place as if it were a continuous totality, and as if the fictional world was capable of corresponding directly to the geographical lived world. And not only that, but the authority of the real world map is in danger of blinding us to other spatial aspects of meaning within the text. So, should we simply accept then that one of the main findings achieved from mapping fiction onto the real world is the degree to which it proves impossible? So to pursue this idea further, I'm going to finish by looking at a second text, Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist. Now, Oliver Twist isn't a detective novel as such, but like the Sherlock Holmes stories, it does contain this kind of tension between mystery and exposure. So what we have here is the complete map, which shows the movements of the main characters mapped onto the booth map, which we've already looked at. And what we can immediately see is that Oliver Twist occupies a very different space from the Sherlock Holmes narratives, and that it has this kind of strong north-south, east-west axis. And because of limited time, we're just going to focus in on one character's movement in relation to this. So Bill Sykes' spatiality is very different from that of the other characters, even though he, like all the rest of the characters, kind of skulk around in the same alleys and side streets, and quite often stay off main routes. Bill Sykes also covers by far the greatest distance and goes approximately 25 miles off the map of central London in 2 directions. And you can see that quite neatly here on the map, in that he goes right off the Booth map in 2 directions, north and east. So I'm going to focus in on 2 of his journeys here. The first is when he moves from Bethnal Green to Chertsey. And this journey is a highly purposeful, goal-directed travel with a known point and a known objective, and that's robbing a rich house out in Chertsey. And this is when he's following an east-west trajectory. At first, the route is very unspecified, so Oliver and Sykes leave the fictional site of Sykes's lodgings, which are somewhere in Bethnal Green, but the exact location isn't mentioned in the text. And then they walk towards the centre, probably, but not definitely, down Bethnal Green Road. So far, so indistinct. Now, then, once they reach Shoreditch, the route becomes much more tightly mapped. And I've got the quote there on the slide to give the sense of that tight mapping. So you have Sun Street, Crown Street, crossing Finsbury Square, by way of Chiswell Street, into Barbican, Long Lane, and so into Smithfield. So at this point then, and you can see on the big map at the bottom of the slide and the inlay there at the top, that at this point the points become much closer together. And this kind of listing of place names in the text then performs that movement. And the tempo of the prose quickens as the 2 move rapidly through the streets. At this point, there's no sense of Sykes avoiding the main streets or taking a devious path. And once they reach Smithfield, which is a well-known landmark and the commercial centre, this acts as a kind of beacon to help ground the route in the reader's imagination. Following to Smithfield, when they reach Holborn, then comes the clock of St Andrew's Church, which, hard upon 7, then fixes the journey in time and space, but only momentarily, as Sykes and Oliver hurry on. But the map can only go so far in drawing this out, so it can't show that there's a long narrative pause in Smithfield. Each point is exactly the same size. The 2 lines on the map indicate that there are 2 walkers, Oliver in yellow and Sykes in black. But what the passage is doing, that the map can't do, is alternating between the 2 perspectives at the same time. So Sykes, object-driven, is bestowed very little attention on the numerous sights and sounds which so astonished the boy. Oliver neither knows the route nor the destination, and, being dragged along, notices all the sights and sounds around him, and it's through him that Smithfield is dwelt on. What's true of the journey into the centre is then true of the journey out of the centre, and this can be seen in the fact that there are no way markers or points on the map between St Andrew's Church and Hyde Park Corner, which you can see there on the far left-hand side of the map. As a result, then, any attempt to map the route after this point is speculative and based on the assumption that Sykes would continue on in as straight a line as possible. So the process of mapping the route and its resulting visualizations brings out the way in which Dickens kind of switches between the representational with very few waypoints and the referential with lots of waypoints close together. So now, second of Sykes's long journeys is the novel's only instance of non-directed travel, and it follows a route taken by most characters entering London in the novel, but in reverse. So most characters enter into London north to south on the Great North Road. Sykes leaves London in the same direction, but via an inverse trajectory, so from south to north. And this kind of spatializes the inversion of purpose of his route, which is flight. He's just murdered Nancy, so he's escaping the city. And what the map reveals at this point is that, as with Sykes's early journey out, the further he travels from London, the further the distance between the waymarks. So in contrast to that street-by-street account that I just gave of the journey from Shoreditch to Holborn, here in this second journey, the points are much more inexact. So there's no sense which streets he takes through Islington, just that he goes through Islington, and that he's heading towards Highgate. So, and on that first journey, Sykes is completely oblivious of his surroundings because all he's focusing on is getting to Chertsey quickly. Whereas here, in this second journey, Sykes is continually distracted and by this kind of uncertainty of direction. He doesn't know where he's going. And this is kind of outlined in the text. So the passage alternates between decisiveness, strode up, struck off, and something much more passive. So almost as soon as, skirted, came upon. And this kind of circularity and repetition that characterizes Sykes' wandering, again, wandering up and down, already traversed, is also enacted at a formal level. So this kind of toing and froing movement is mirrored in this almost chiastic up the hill at Highgate, down to Highgate Hill. The loosely mapped route appearing as a long kind of northerly path, you can see here with various loops coming off, although actually we can't see the loops. So I'll scoot back to them. Various loops coming off there, kind of spatializes that kind of uncertainty in Sykes's demeanor there at that point, and his kind of the traumatized state that he's in now that he's murdered Nancy. And then finally, Sykes's longest journey exemplifies another of the novel's core spatial strategies. The route out is narrated in detail, but the journey back is left almost implied. And this is the case with other journeys out and journeys back. So the return from Chertsey is completely unnarrated. Similarly, the journey back from the West End Hotel that Nancy makes and back from London Bridge by Nancy and Claypole. And here, at this point, we're told that Sykes resolved to lie concealed within a short distance of the metropolis and, entering it at dusk by a circuitous route, to proceed straight to that part which he had fixed on for his destination. So the narrative technique makes it appear, through that shift in tense from he resolved to lie to entering it at dusk, as though this is narrated in real time. But this is only what Sykes plans to do. We have no idea whether it's actually enacted in this way. The journey isn't narrated at all. And so here we kind of finish on this kind of key challenge to real world mapping. How then can we map movement that occurs off stage? In a way that acknowledges and does justice to this kind of moment of deliberate verbal evasion. In these kinds of examples, we can see how works of high realism resist the attempt to be fixed absolutely. So in short, Oliver Twist exceeds the map. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. I will stop sharing, and I guess if anyone wants any questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, both of you. I really enjoyed that. Do we have any questions from anybody? Feel free either to put your hand up or to put something into the chat. Patty.
Hi, thank you very much for that. As always, it's super inspiring to hear you know everything about your work. I want to ask you a question that I think it might be a bit weird, because I think by doing the whole presentation, you already answered the question, but I basically want to hear your thoughts regarding, I'm thinking basically coming from a disciplinary perspective, you as literary scholars, how carrying out this kind of work or of mapping helps you in the interpretation of the text. And I know that, you know, you have done already that, but I would like to hear a more direct answer. Basically, we were doing the translation, for instance, to someone that is not a literary scholar or someone that do not knows much about your work. How can you, point out to that, or thinking about this text, in ways that just reading doesn't do, right? So how does mapping give you that extra kind of thing that just reading wouldn't do? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Shall I start?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, so we have a full paper on the Conan Doyle actually, and what we realized through doing it, what you're actually doing is, I can't think how to quite put it, but you're kind of uncovering the strategies of realism, basically the spatial strategies. That's what it took us a long while to realize that. We're like, oh, this is really interesting, but like you say, like, what actually are we getting? No, actually what we're doing is only by mapping can you see, okay, how have they created the illusion of the real space, and that's what you're doing, which you can't really do otherwise. And so for example, when we didn't talk about it here, but Conan Doyle is very tricksy. He's very inaccurate. He'll mix real and fictional names all over the place. It's actually really hard to map, because you'd be like, oh, is it this street? It's a slightly different name. Is this what he means? And then we turned to Dickens. I can't think why we did it, Becca, just to compare, maybe. I can't think why we did turn to Dickens. But anyway, when we turned to Dickens, Dickens is 100% accurate. I mean, if there's a name in Dickens, there's a real name, for sure. You know, totally reliable in terms of names. And Conan Doyle, totally unreliable in terms of names. And so then you're like, okay, is it how deliberate? Is this deliberate? Is it intentional or unintentional? But also that they then use different strategies, different kinds of strategy to play with it. Now, the thing about Conan Doyle is, I mean, I've read Conan Doyle really thoroughly because I'm, you know, my go-to relaxing reading is detective fiction. And I've always just totally bought it, you know. So I just assumed it was real. I didn't. I mean, why wouldn't I? You know. But the illusion of the real is absolute. He's wildly inaccurate. You know, he's wildly inaccurate. And of course, you've got people like completely buying into that at the time, thinking Sherlock Holmes is a real person, writing to him, asking for advice. So what is also interesting is, even though Conan Doyle is not at all accurate, he still creates the realist illusion. Anyway,
yeah. I would second that. And I suppose also it's before mapping them both, you would assume, and Sally's already kind of mentioned this, but you would assume that they're both as accurate as each other, that they're both true to Victorian London, that they're both drawing on real named places, especially when characters are moving. You would kind of expect that maybe they would live somewhere fictional, but that when they're moving through the streets, they're moving through real named places. And actually, it was only through mapping, and mapping both, really, that you could see how differently they use literary London. They use London. So, yeah, it's kind of, and I suppose you don't have to digitally map to find that out. You could paper map or write a very complicated chart, but why would you, in a sense? And also, with a realist novel like Dickens, is it feasible that you could keep all of that in your head? I don't think so. So it's kind of by visualizing, you're making something huge and voluminous seem like visualizing it, so containing it and explaining it in that sense as well.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, sorry, go on, Sally.
Yeah, so your other question was like, what does mapping it reveal? So Dickens, again, you know, Oliver Twist, I know that book quite well, but until we mapped it, I hadn't really realized how disproportionate the scale is between Bill's movements and the others. You know, you can't, okay, goes further than the other, but it goes way further than the others, so I mean, miles out of the city. And I didn't realize that at all until I mapped it, and the axes as well. There's a really strong axes. And again, until you fully visualize it, you're like, oh my God, actually everyone, they don't, the thing with the Great North Road is everyone uses it. So even when Oliver's kidnapped and he's taken by Mr. Brownlow back to his house, they use the same route. There's absolutely no reason why they should use that. So it's like, okay, they didn't have to go by the Great North Road to get to Islington. I mean, they could, you know, but he's really kind of doing this. So stuff like that, you kind of like, okay, I just I don't know, you didn't notice it when you read. I mean, I'm just, as we were doing, I was thinking, if you really focused on like deictic language, you know, if you text mined, you probably maybe it would come out if through the text. I was thinking, could you get it through the text at all? Yeah. Maybe.
I mean, it's so sorry, I don't mean to hog the questions, but I'm just thinking, of course. I mean, it is so interesting to think about the kind of spatial imagination of each author, right? And how much this accuracy, for instance, in terms of the maps, would translate to their work, and mobility within the city, right? I'm just thinking, is the imagination of authors and the reflection, therefore, on what they write, related to their knowledge, of course, of London, but also their experiences of London? And I think, mobility in that sense works quite interestingly, right? So when you walk a city, your choices of, turning here or there will have quite a lot of different variables, right? So will be influenced, I mean, by different variables, whether you know the street, whether you know the neighborhood, whether is a dangerous place or not. So all these different things are, just fascinating to me in the ways that you have been able to map all that. And therefore, I think, are these authors moving, across all these places? Why, what you said before, why one is going like way out and the other is not? So yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point as well, that so different characters. So in the Oliver Twist bit, we looked at like different characters. So again, what they often do, so most of the characters are criminal. All of the criminal characters move in a certain way. So they move very rapidly. Then it keeps telling you that they move, he explicitly says that, and they'll sort of skirt around areas. They'll go through the area of poverty, presumably because that would be dangerous, but they kind of skirt around these areas of poverty. And Fagin is the most hidden. So Fagin, you very rarely know where Fagin is. So again, it's really interesting, as you say, when you kind of compare across different characters. And it's very interesting to scale it up and kind of look at different Dickens in different genres in Dickens. Yeah, there's so much you could do.
No, that's really fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks. Any more questions? We still have a little bit of time. I was actually very curious about the Minecraft end of this. I could really see where it's going in terms of the mapping and what that starts to reveal. But taking it the one stage further into Minecraft, what sort of research questions? And so you hinted that impact was leading to research, though. We didn't hint it, you actually said it. But where does it actually take you? What sort of new things is that starting to reveal, or questions is that starting to throw up?
Yeah, so I mean, with Litcraft more broadly, not just with the Sherlock Holmes, what that's really about, or the area that I'm really interested in is immersion. And so the difference between readerly immersion and what Paddy was talking about anyway, about story worlds in the mind, how important is visualization as an element of immersion, and how important is that to the reading experience, or the pleasure of the reading experience? So being lost in a book is kind of the hook for reading, and the Minecraft is almost creating like an externalization of that. Well, that's how that with the Litcraft resource, that's what we do. It's sort of working mimetically. So I'm very interested in experiential reading, if you like, in Minecraft. What happens when the map is brought to life, and how does that then bear back on the reading experience?
And the kind of three-dimensional street scene, I can see those being a really good way of kind of sucking people in, particularly those kind of hard to reach groups that you've talked about before. I'm fascinated by those, and particularly how real or fictional they themselves are, because they give a real impression of, Victorian, this part of Victorian London looked like this. Is that genuine, or how artistic is it against historically accurate?
It's pretty historically accurate. I'll let Becca talk a bit about the LSE build as well, because history people will be really interested in that. Becca, just.
Yeah. So and it was really because we reached out to LSE because they held the booth maps and we wanted to use them, which they said we could. And then did they ask us, or did we asked them?
We asked them.
We asked them whether they would like us to make, because we were already making Holmes's London in Minecraft, whether they'd like us to then make them some resources based on booths instead of homes, which they said yes please, and we got some money to do that. So then this is what sort of we noticed when we started making the resources for Booth compared to making the resources for Sherlock Holmes,
Right, yeah.
is that Booth was easy, and that's maybe because it's historic. So the kind of the resources in Minecraft that we made for Booth were quite simple and weren't particularly challenging, we thought. Whereas for Holmes, translating literary narrative into a game was much more of a challenging transition compared to making historical resources to explore the Booth archives, if you like.
Yeah, so the Booth archive, to make the map, Booth's assistant went on walks with the police. So he walked like the police beats and checked. So coming back to your question, yes, it's very accurate because he's literally checking house, like he describes the houses on this side of the street, the houses on that side of the street, the color coding, and if it's changed, he's doing it for the second version of the map. So it's like from red to purple or whatever. And so
how many stories the houses have, what the pavements are made out of, what kind of rubbish was on the street.
Yeah.
So we put all that. So for the LSE build, I would say the LSE build is really accurate to the area around LSE and Victorian London, because we put all of that information. So for the LSE, we did like the police walk. That's what you're doing in the game, and we put all the information from the notebooks onto the Miro board for the guys. And then in that map, they've also put like an edging along we didn't show you any of the LSE, but it's really good as well. But they put like a color edging along the curb so that as you're going, so you can see when the color changes so the color coding is in the map for the LSE build. And then we have like socio-historic like activities, like go to the slums, getting lost in the slums, you have to find your way out, moving people from a slum to a new building and designing their building for them and stuff like this.
That's incredible. It sounds really good, actually. Yeah, really liked it.
But what's interesting is, like I said, it was more outside our remit. It was so much easier to do. I just still don't realize. It's like those tasks were just a doddle. It's like, let's do this. It's like really tight, really clear, really easy. And the Sherlock Holmes is just so much harder.
Yeah.
I don't really know why. So I guess it is moving across the real and fictional that makes it hard. I don't know.
Okay. Any last questions? Time is against us, but any last questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very, very much. That was really, really good. Maybe give a virtual round of applause just to wrap that up. Yeah, that was great.
Great, thanks, Ian. It's great for us because it's good to have a practice and see that it goes okay. Yeah, that's useful for us as well.
Good, and thanks everybody for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.